On December 27, 1892, Livingstone and Biddle College, now known as Johnson C. Smith University, played in Salisbury, North Carolina, with Biddle winning 5-0. Over time, HBCU football has evolved. HBCU football's popularity continues to rise. Millions attend games each year and millions more watch on television. The HBCU bands provide some of the top entertainment in the country. Over that time, some of the best players to ever play in the National Football League played at HBCUs. Every Monday through Friday on the HBCU Football Daily Podcast, national radio and television host Donal Ware takes a look at what's happening in HBCU football and talks with coaches, players, administrators, and media about the season. Make sure you join the conversation on social media. Now, here's your host, Donal Ware.
This is the HBCU Football Daily Podcast for today, Monday, August 7th. I'm Donal Ware. Hope you had an absolutely wonderful weekend. I know I did spend a little time away on vacation, went to Myrtle Beach, just a couple of days, but it was refreshing and a good getaway as we are now currently just 19 days away from the start of the HBCU football season. So I needed that refresher. And of course, I'll be back on the weekend edition of BOXTOROW on a radio station near you, as well as on Sirius XM as well. So today we want to talk some SIAC football today here on the HBCU Football Daily Podcast. And what I want to do first, I want to start with the rundown of how the head coaches and sports information directors feel like the season will go with the preseason predicted order of finish. Obviously, at number 1, you've got Benedict. Number 2, Albany State. Number 3, Tuskegee. Fort Valley State is number 4, followed by Savannah State at number 5. Lane is 6. Edward Waters is 7. Miles is 8. Central State is 9. Clark Atlanta, number 10. Allen at number 11. Kentucky State at number 12. And Morehouse at 13. And I look at this, and Edward Waters had a nice season last year. Again, you're looking at Edward Waters and Allen now part officially of the SIAC in terms of being able to compete for a conference title. I like Benedict. I mean, I think Chennis Berry is the head coach in his second season. His first season was absolutely phenomenal. And I think anytime you have a guy like a Lubert Danellis, who was a HBCU All-American last year, returns, was the SIAC Defensive Player of the Year. I mean, this guy on the defensive line absolutely wreaks havoc. And I think, but you know, this is going to be a team that I think is going to be good offensively as well. But when you have a guy like a Danellis on your team, is going to be really, really good defensively. He's a disruptor, a lot of tackles for loss, a lot of sacks. This guy can really play. He's going to lead a very solid defense. Wasn't clear. I mean, I wasn't 100% clear. And I couldn't get, unfortunately, before I did this podcast, I couldn't get any clarity as to whether Eric Phoenix returns as the quarterback. He was a junior last year. I mean, if he returns, I mean, I think that really catapults this offense tremendously, because the offensive line is going to be extremely solid. And, oh, by the way, Noah Zaire Scotland returns in the backfield. And, Phoenix comes back. He's a guy that can throw the football. He's got some ability to run the football there as well. But Scotland in that backfield, almost 600 yards rushing last year, almost 5 yards a carry. He had 8 rushing touchdowns on last year. I think should be really, really key. I mean, and in terms of the predicted order of finish, like I don't have a major issue with it. I don't know Tuskegee, because remember, Tuskegee caught fire. Really, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Tuskegee may have started the season off 0-3 and caught fire down the stretch and ended up playing in the SIAC championship game, losing to Benedict, but no Reginald Ruffin there as the head coach this year. And so we'll see. I mean, how does that play? And I think when you have new regime, even if you had some players that some good players that return on last year, and I think that's still can present a bit of an issue, different philosophies for coaches. Sam Shade comes in as the head coach there at Tuskegee for the 2023 season. Same thing with Albany State. I mean, I think Albany State really has a chance to really do some big things this year. I mean, when you look at it from the quarterback position, I think Deontay Banu, he can do some things at the quarterback position, can pass, can run there as well. But this is the thing. I mean, Gabe Gardenia had done an excellent job as the head coach. They couldn't quite get it. And it maybe wasn't as great last year, couldn't quite get over the hump, but I thought the years that he was there, he did a really, really good job. But now you've got a Quinn Gray coming in. Of course, Quinn Gray, the last 3 years as working with the quarterbacks offense with Alcorn State. He comes in, former Florida A&M quarterback, played in the league as well. So, again, another situation where you have a different head coach coming in, much like Tuskegee, but some talent. That's the thing. Some talent that's going to be really, really good. I mean, I think when you look at Albany State, yes, offensively, Albany State was tough, but defense is really the calling card for Albany State and really had been. A lot of those guys don't necessarily return that were were part of that really good defense last year. The defense going back to 2021 was excellent, like 6 shutouts that year. Not as good last year, but still should be somewhat tough. And, we'll see what happens there with Albany State. But again, you're talking about a new head coach there. Again, at number 4, Fort Valley State, that's my dark horse. When I think about Fort Valley State, I mean, Kelvin Durham comes back as the quarterback. This is a young man that threw for 16 touchdowns last year, completed 64% of his passes. He had a really, really solid season. He's got Corinthians Edmonds to throw the football to. He's a preseason first team all SIAC type of performer. And so, you got to figure, I mean, that's going to be really, really good. And then defensively, I mean, I liked Tim Olderman last year. If I'm not mistaken, he's a first team preseason guy, but I think he was a first team all SIAC guy on last year as well. You've got Kentrell Lawson coming back at one of the linebacker positions, Landon Austin in that secondary. So this is going to be a complete team. And I think it's going to be a team that's really going to challenge for that SIAC crown. And as I'm kind of going here, as I'm talking, I'm going to look up the schedule because I want to see when Albany State and Fort Valley State play on this season. But that's going to be a big-time game. Now, if you remember, in the polls last year, in both the media and the coaches poll for a lot of the season, it was Fort Valley State that was ahead of Benedict until Benedict and Fort Valley State played, and Benedict put a whooping really on Fort Valley State. And of course, it's going to be. I'm looking at the. Let's see. I'm looking at Fort Valley State. I'm looking to see when Fort Valley State and Benedict play. But for most of that season last year was Fort Valley State that was ahead of Benedict until the two teams met on last year. And then, Benedict left absolutely no doubt. ESPNU game on a Thursday night. That shows you how big this game is, because historically, when you look at those Thursday night games on ESPNU from an HBCU perspective, it's either a MEAC matchup or a SWAC matchup. But this game is so big, moving it to Thursday night. It's in Columbia at Benedict, and it's a nationally televised game on ESPNU. So that really shows you how big time of a game that's going to be. But I think from a talent perspective, I think that these are the most two talented teams, meaning Benedict and Fort Valley State in the SIAC. But that's not to take anything away from Albany State. I think also that Savannah State should have a pretty good season because they're going to be really good up front on that offensive line, and that's half the battle. Shamarcus Poole in the backfield, so they should really be able to run the football. And as far as throwing the football, we'll see, because that hasn't been something that Savannah State has excelled at in the last couple of years. Another team that I'm really interested in looking at and seeing what they're going to do this year, and is picked to finish sixth and could be a lot higher, is Lane. I think Lane put up a bunch of offensive points last year. If the Dragons can get any defense, then it should be much better for Lane. And when you've got a preseason first team All-America, HBCU All-America, and Jaquez Jones at your wide receiver position, I mean, that's going to, I think, bode well. This is going to be a good offense, I think, for Lane in 2023. But I'm interested to see what Edward Waters is going to do this year, especially coming off a solid 2022 campaign with an opportunity to compete for the SIAC championship. Can Miles bounce back? Again, you go back to 2021. It was a Miles team that ended up in the SIAC championship game, couldn't win it, but then last year just fell apart. But again, a lot of that, and again, I'm interested to see I would call it the Reginald Ruffin effect, right? Like Reginald Ruffin goes from Miles in 2021 playing in the SIAC championship game to Miles absolutely falling apart on last year. Meanwhile, he goes to Tuskegee. What happens? Tuskegee reels it in at the end of the season. Tuskegee ends up going to the SIAC championship game, loses, but now Reginald Ruffin is in administration. As a matter of fact, he's the athletics director there at Tuskegee, no longer the head football coach. What ultimately happens to Tuskegee this year? You know, Morehouse had a really tough season on last year. Can the Maroon Tigers bounce back? Where will the thoroughbreds of Kentucky State fall? Will they, in fact, be at the bottom half of the SIAC this year? Teddy Keaton has, he's had some success as a head coach. He's at Allen. I think that may be a little bit of a sleeper, because I think if Teddy Keaton has what he needs, in other words, now that Allen is a full-fledged member, and if the administration at Allen gives Teddy Keaton what he needs, watch out for the Yellow Jackets there as well. Will Clark, Atlanta bounce back, Central State, etc. But I think your top dogs, to me, Benedict, Fort Valley State. I would look at next. Savannah State. Actually, I would look at next. I like Albany with Quinn Gray. I would look next at Savannah State, then Tuskegee, and then Lane for me, and then Edward Waters, and then the rest of the SIAC. So that's a look and my thoughts at the SIAC for the 2023 season. This week on the HBCU Football Daily Podcast, begin to look for us to talk with some of the head coaches from the respective programs this week on the HBCU Football Daily Podcast. Don't forget to tell a couple of friends about the HBCU Football Daily Podcast, where you can watch us on the Box to Row YouTube channel, where you can listen to us online at BOXTOROW.com, and as well as iHeartMedia.com. And listen, don't forget to tell a friend about the HBCU Football Daily Podcast. If you're on our YouTube page, subscribe to the Box to Row YouTube channel. You can also give us your comments on our Twitter page at BOXTOROW, BOXTOROW. I'll talk with you tomorrow.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the HBCU Football Daily Podcast. You can also listen to the podcast at BOXTOROW.com, iHeartMedia, or wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to get your HBCU football fix on Box to Row with Donal Ware each weekend on the radio station near you, and on SiriusXM on HBCU, Channel 142, and on ESPNU Radio on SiriusXM, Channel 84. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Box to Row for the latest in HBCU football, and don't forget to tell a friend.